Great.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Wicked Energy with JG. I'm here with David Amos, founder and managing director of Plus Zero. David, it's an absolute honor. It looks like you're on a beach. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Justin. I'm delighted to be joining you as well. I'm a big fan of your podcast. And yes, the background there is my favourite beach in the Western Isles of Scotland, where the business was originally founded. So I always put that one up because it makes me feel very happy and cheery when I see it.
Man, you know what? I absolutely love that. And obviously my background is me at home here in my home office, but on my computer screen, I have a background of it's a sort of an aerial view of Kelowna, British Columbia, which is where I'm from or where I grew up. And again, it makes when I turn on my computer, I always look at that and it brings me a sense of sort of calmness, peace, and it just puts a smile on my face, and it just reminds me of how much I love being home whenever I do get to go back home. But I'm such a water guy, and so mine is half of it is a freshwater lake, and then just like it's like a resort town along the beach line. So again, I can appreciate that. I didn't realize Scotland had beaches like that, man. Is that common?
So yeah, there's good beaches in Scotland. Do my bit for the Scottish tourist industry, but the Western Isles in particular, that the farthest northwest parts of Scotland have got some fantastic beaches, as you can see. That's about a mile long stretch of golden sand, and
Man,
there's because it's so remote. You can see one guy in the picture there strolling along the front, but you can have that whole beach to yourself. So
is that you?
no, I think that might be my
Oh,
wife, actually. I took the picture. So
dude, that is so cool. I love it, man. What a beautiful. If you're not watching on YouTube, just Google. What's it called? What beach is that?
So that beach is so it's called Scarista Beach.
Okay. Yeah.
Scarista, but there's a beach in the west in Harris that regularly comes up in Condé Nast Travelers' top 10 beaches in the world, which is called Luscantire Beach. So your listeners, if they Google Harris Western Isles beaches, it's likely to be Luscantire that comes up. So, but an
Beautiful.
equally beautiful stretch of golden sand and blue sea. The
That's
only
right.
issue there is the temperature, so it's probably only about 15 degrees there. So
And
it
I'm
looks
assuming
like the
Celsius,
Bahamas.
right?
It looks
That's
like the Bahamas, but it doesn't. It's not the Bahamas from the temperature perspective. So
yeah, but so 15 degrees Celsius, I'm assuming, right?
yes, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, I speak that language too. Obviously, in Canada, it's Celsius, which would probably 15 degrees Celsius would probably be in like the 60s or so, maybe here in the US. But yeah, it does look like the Bahamas, and the water is a beautiful color. And again, as you can tell, I admire beaches and that kind of thing. But anyway, we'll keep moving along here. I want to give a big shout out to Bina Sharma. I recently had her on the show. She actually made the introduction, and it's I've had people ask me, where do you come up with these guests? And I really don't do any of the work. I just ask the guest that's on at the time and say, do you have anyone who would make for a great guest on the show? That's the only thing I ask for in return. And I get some of the best people that I would have otherwise never got in front of. So this is a perfect example of that. Bina hit me up, had you on there. She's like, you got to talk to David. He's doing some fascinating things out there in the hydrogen space. And here we are. So again, a big shout out to Bina Sharma. And if any of the listeners out there are previous guests and you've hooked me up with other guests, I deeply appreciate that, just because there's so many fascinating people out there doing fascinating things. And the more we can talk about it, the better our industry is going to be and the better our world's going to be. But before we talk about energy, I'm super curious, David. I looked on your LinkedIn, and can you please describe what lickety split is? Because you seem to be involved with something with that name. I found that hilarious because the only other time I've seen lickety split is at Uptown Sushi. They've got a sushi roll called lickety split, and I'm pretty sure it has nothing to do with sushi.
No, it's definitely nothing to do with sushi. So Lickety Spit is a charity in Scotland that's run by a good friend of ours, and who was an actress, and she developed this very, very powerful sort of approach to trying to bring kids out of their shells, get them involved in sort of creative play-based activity, and kind of build confidence, and they take this approach around schools, particularly in very deprived areas where the kids are maybe not very educationally competent, could not maybe behavioral problems and everything, and it just has a massive impact on just improving the confidence and engagement of the young kids. So that's what it is. I was on the board of my friend's charity for a number of years, supporting her sort of roll that out across Scotland. So
wow, no, that speaks to
nothing to do with sushi.
Well, I mean, that was the only thing I could find relevant with the name, but I think that's such a selfless act for you to commit your time to that. And so again, it's the more we can do with our children globally, I mean, sets up the next generation and in the future, right? And you talk about active sort of based play and stuff like that. My daughter came home, and here in Houston, it's so hot. Like it's 100 degrees, which again is like in the 40s Celsius. And it is very painful to play outside. But the reality is like someone can still go outside for 10 or 15 minutes, but the schools here in Katy are not letting them go outside for recess and lunch because it's too hot, which, I mean, give them a little extra water and let them play. It just, it seems so odd to me. And, because she came home and she was saying how bored she was of school because they weren't letting her go outside. And it's like kids are playing outside at home anyway. Why not? And at least at school, they're somewhat controlled environment. Couldn't you just let them play outside? It's not 200 degrees.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the problem.
Crazy.
We don't let our kids play as much as we should. And the whole thing about Virginia and lickety-spit's approach is all it needs is the child's imagination. And they just create that environment where the kids can come up with all these amazing things, and they could have put it into a bit of a structure. So no, it's actually quite joyful to watch.
There's nothing like seeing, there's nothing like seeing a kid use their creativity, smile, have fun, laugh. As a parent, it just brings nothing but joy to the heart. But no, I saw that, and after reading into it, I kind of knew what it was, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to bring it up and talk about it. But let's pivot and talk energy, and more specifically what you're doing, which again is also fascinating on the work front. Again, looking at LinkedIn, I noticed you recently deployed some of your power supply technology, which we'll get into, but you had it at some really cool venues, which really gave me a different perspective on the application. But you had it at a big barbecue event and a marathon as a power supply source. Can you kind of talk about like what that was? But then we'll get into what your company is and what your technology is. But yeah, let's just like talk about these venues you somehow were able to get into.
Yeah, so basically, anything event or venue that requires a diesel generator to provide power. So, most events happen in places where there isn't grid power available. So, outdoor events. So they usually use diesel generators to power them. And so our technology provides a carbon-free alternative to the diesel generators. So, we've tried to look for events that are a bit more high profile, just to give us a bit of profile associated it. So we started, the very first one we did was actually just coming out of COVID. I don't know if your listeners will maybe not know, but in Edinburgh, where I'm sitting today, it has a huge, big international arts festival every year, and one of the biggest sort of arts festivals in the world. Sort of the population of the city doubles for the month of August. Because of the and coming out of COVID, they were running. They usually have all of their events in the big theaters and venues in the city, but because of COVID, they had built some very large outdoor structures that had good ventilation in order to sort of put a show on and performances. So we were asked to power some of the performances at the Edinburgh International Festival's contemporary music venue, which was the first time that anything had ever been hydrogen powered at the festival. So that was the first one. We then powered a venue at COP26 in Glasgow, when Glasgow hosted COP26. I think the first time that a COP venue has been hydrogen powered. So it was a marine sustainability and offshore wind conference venue. We powered an event for the First Minister of Scotland at Edinburgh Castle for the Global Hydrogen Council, and then I think the one that you saw, we had powered. Scotland's hosting the World Cycling Championships, or last few weeks had hosted the World Cycling Championships. So we powered the start of one of the races, the big display boards and PA system and everything. So we kind of, anything like that would normally use a diesel generator, we can offer that hydrogen solution. And I say we try to do stuff that attracts a bit of attention rather than just boring stuff.
Wow. No, I think it's from a marketing perspective, it's amazing, right? Like, I think that's certainly for that type of application. And then again, just the graphics alongside the unit are really neat, and hopefully it drummed up enough attention to give you more traction on the business front. But so let's dive into Plus Zero. And then I would imagine folks are right away saying, well, if you're replacing a diesel generator, and I'm going to ask those questions, but I wanted to get that out of the way first. I thought that was really neat. But let's go ahead and kind of back up a little bit. I'd love for you to just kind of describe the origin story of Plus Zero and what inspired you to focus on what I would imagine would be climate change, or however you define that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Justin. And I guess because, again, if you've looked at LinkedIn, you'll see my involvement in energy is reasonably recent. It's not, I haven't come from a oil and gas or renewables background at all. I've had a slightly diverse background, but often involving managing quite large, complex, multi-partner projects that have got public sector agencies, universities, business, community organizations. So, the kind of origin story for Plus Zero came from a role I had about 6 years ago. I started it in Scotland. There was a programme of UK and Scottish government investments into the different regions in Scotland called growth deals, and they were designed to try and support economic growth and innovation in different parts of Scotland. Started off with all of the city regions, so Glasgow city region got £1 billion investment from UK government, Scottish government. Then once Glasgow got a deal, all the other Scottish cities wanted one. So then Edinburgh, then Aberdeen, and then eventually these growth deals were offered to all the rural parts of Scotland. And I was asked to lead the development of the growth deal for Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles. So again, your listeners may be not familiar with the geography of Scotland, but there are 3 major populated island areas in Scotland, in the Western Isles and the far west, Orkney just to the north of Scotland, and then Shetland kind of even further north. So I led the development of the growth deal for Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles. And while these island groups are relatively small populations, they have got the best renewable energy potential in Scotland. Onshore wind, offshore wind. In fact, there was a report a number of years ago that said that part of Scotland's got probably about 30 to 40% of Europe's accessible renewable energy potential. So the 3 islands have the potential to become, renewable energy powerhouses going forward. And so we focused quite a lot in the growth deal on how could we capitalize on that potential in the islands to support, job creation, economic growth, and decarbonization of the islands' own economies. And so we said, well, what can you do with abundant renewable energy when the turbines, the offshore turbines all get built up, rather than just exporting all of that electricity to the mainland, which is what people were originally talking about, which doesn't really bring a lot of benefit for island communities. How could you add value on the island with that electricity? So the production of green hydrogen from renewable energy through process of electrolysis was something that we investigated and felt that there was huge potential for these island economies to become centres of green hydrogen production, and that green hydrogen then being an energy commodity that they could use both to decarbonise their own communities, but also supply, export as an energy commodity for for other use. So that was really where my interest first came. I became convinced that this had a real, massive transformational opportunity for the islands. My wife's family are from the Western Isles, so we're very, very familiar with the Western Isles. We've been traveling there for 30 years. And unlike Orkney and Shetland, the Western Isles never benefited from North Sea oil and gas, because there was none in the Western Isles waters. The UK North Sea oil industry was based around Shetland and Orkney. So Orkney and Shetland communities benefited very substantially from the oil and gas industry. Which is beginning to wind down now. So, renewables and green hydrogen production provides that sort of future. But for the first time, it allows the Western Isles to really look at how it could become a sort of energy powerhouse as well. So I, very keen to sort of try and push forward that opportunity in the Western Isles. So I led that growth deal to the point where we signed the deal with the UK and Scottish government, and then I set +0 up to try and accelerate the hydrogen sector in the Western Isles and in Scotland. So that was where it all started.
Wow, no, I can appreciate the context and the color behind the whole, or the story behind it. It's again, sitting here, in the US bubble, it's just amazing to see what other folks around the world are doing. And often, again, I don't know how much Western media you watch, but everyone, a lot of times people are looking at, oh, hold on, my son just came in. Oh, hey, buddy. Okay. Nice. That's so cool. I do apologize for the listeners.
No
All right,
problem.
Ace, buddy, I'm just on a work call. Okay. Where's mom? Okay. Yeah, that's fine, buddy. Okay. Sorry about that.
Just one of my colleagues, Jules, who manages all our event stuff, he's got 4 boys under the age of 9. So I'm used to having small boys climbing all over Zoom and Teams calls. So no problem.
I've done about 50, probably about 60 some episodes. And that's the first time he's walked in and taken the attention away. But that's okay. This is where this is life. But no, what I was getting back is Western media does a great job, and I don't necessarily agree with it, is just sort of looking at Europe and a lot of places in that part of the world as, just the energy policy. There's questions around it, but the reality is energy demand globally is going up. And so what I can appreciate is the level of effort being put into things like what you're doing on the hydrogen space. And hydrogen here in the US, there's a lot of headlines, but you don't necessarily see a lot of it being executed. And maybe it does, but again, from my experience and what I know and what I'm exposed to, there's not much out there. And so I would love to take the opportunity to take this as an opportunity to educate folks a little bit. Can you speak on like how green hydrogen differentiates itself from, say, other types of hydrogen? Because I know there's a loft of colors. And then if you could explain where it comes from, how it's used to generate power, and then just some of the like high level logistics behind it, I think would help kind of connect the dots for folks.
Yeah. So, hydrogen there's already a huge amount of hydrogen produced. I think something like 70 million metric tons of hydrogen is kind of manufactured produced each year, because it's used in a whole range of things. Probably the biggest is in things like ammonia production for fertilizers and explosives, but it's used in oil refining, I'm told, steel making, methanol production, hydrogenation, and kind of for food oils and stuff. So it's a very widely used chemical gas around the world. Has been for probably hundreds of years, but nearly all of that hydrogen is what's called grey hydrogen, and it comes from natural gas. So the process called steam methane reformation, which takes natural gas, reacts it with steam in the presence of a catalyst, and that produces hydrogen and carbon dioxide, and that's how that 70 million tons of hydrogen is currently made. and that's in the color terms, that's what's called grey hydrogen.
Okay.
So there's something called blue hydrogen now, which is the same process to produce the hydrogen, but you capture, rather than release the CO2 and contribute to kind of global warming, you capture the CO2 and either use that CO2 for another process or pump it. In Scotland's case, it's pumping it into empty oil and gas wells under the North Sea. So you can sequester it away, so it doesn't cause any issues climate-wise. So that's blue hydrogen. And actually, Bina Sharma, who you mentioned at the start, that's Bina's fantastic woman, hugely impressive what she's achieved, and the technology that they're just launching creates a much more efficient way of capturing CO2 from processes like steam methane reformation. And there's a lot of, the Middle East and a lot, UAE, Saudi Arabia, looking at potential to produce blue hydrogen. So, from the natural gas that they produce, but capturing the carbon. So that's blue hydrogen. And I think that's likely to play quite a part in the hydrogen, rolling out the hydrogen sector, because it produces hydrogen at a relatively low cost. And then green hydrogen is hydrogen that's produced through the process of electrolysis, where, don't know if you remember your school chemistry, but you put the electricity into a most likely a kind of alkaline solution, and you got bubbles of oxygen on one of the electrodes and bubbles of hydrogen off the other. That's basically electricity is used to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. And if your source of electricity is renewable electricity, wind turbine, wave power, hydropower, solar power, then it's green hydrogen. So there's no carbon produced as a consequence of the hydrogen production. In Scotland's case, it's very much green hydrogen produced from wind power that the country's looking at, because we've got an awful lot of wind, we've got a lot of water, and therefore, one of the largest offshore wind auctions happened in Scotland last year, 28 gigawatts of offshore wind in the Scotland. We're going to be producing, we already produce a lot of wind power, but we're going to be producing an awful lot more going forward. So that's the source of renewable power that Scotland's looking at to produce green hydrogen. In other parts of the world, like Australia, Middle East, I guess in the US as well, solar is seen as probably one of the most effective sources of that power if you're wanting to produce hydrogen. The kind of the benefit of matching renewable power up with electrolysis and hydrogen production is that, because renewables are intermittent, and matching the demand for power with the supply of renewable power is a challenge. So in Scotland in the summer, in a windy day, 80% of the potential wind generating capacity of the turbines that are already installed is wasted, because there's no demand for the power. So what you can do is use produce hydrogen from electrolysis, when otherwise there would be no demand for the electricity, and that allows you to store the energy, at very terawatt sort of scale, which you wouldn't be able to do at the moment with batteries. It would, in order to store that kind of amount of energy in battery form would be hugely expensive, whereas hydrogen production allows you a sort of cost-effective way of capturing that power and storing it at a kind of large scale, and then using it to when the demand for energy is required.
Gotcha. So it's important to have the ability to store hydrogen. It's almost like a form of energy storage, essentially, I would imagine. Then you can use that to then for power supply or power creation, I guess, and increase the supply.
Exactly. I mean, if where you don't have an immediate requirement for the energy, then hydrogen is one of the ways in which you can store energy rather than a sort of electron form as it would be in batteries. It's in a sort of molecular form. And I guess in America, in California, I think in particular, there's been quite a lot of Toyota Mirais, which are hydrogen fuel cell cars, being used. So and that way the hydrogen is being stored in a tank to get converted back into electricity to power the car. It's rather than storing the electricity in a battery and powering the car as you do in a Tesla or an electric vehicle. So it's just another way of storing the energy. There are some drawbacks because converting the hydrogen back into electricity, it's the technology to do that is it's an electrolyzer in reverse. It's called a fuel cell, and current fuel cell technology is about 50-60% efficient. So you lose a chunk of the energy you have in the hydrogen, in the process of converting it back to electricity. So
right.
But from what we can see, the technology is improving all the time. So electrolyzer efficiency is improving, fuel cell efficiency is improving. So eventually those losses will be less than they currently are. But I go back to the point that in a windy day in the Scotland summer, 80% of that renewable power would otherwise be wasted. So if you're able to capture it and you convert it into hydrogen, even if at the end you only get 30% of that original power output, that's still that's 30% better than losing it. So
than just having it, just wasted. So how much, I guess, to try and sort of quantify that, like how much, because I think of, in a volume case, like, X amount of barrels of oil stored, or certain amount of natural gas can produce, say a certain amount of electricity. Are there big hydrogen storage tanks like all over the place for this stuff, or can it be stored underground, or what's the typical mechanism for storing a bunch of hydrogen?
Yeah, so I mean, it really depends on scale, and it's kind of one of the big issues with hydrogen that people are sort of trying to scratch their heads about in terms of work out, just what role can hydrogen play in the kind of decarbonization. So if we just take it at the very small scale, which is what we do, which is we use hydrogen as a fuel for our hydrogen combustion engine generators, then we store the hydrogen in compressed gas form in cylinders.
Okay, so like propane kind of?
Like propane, butane, compressed CNG, LNG. That the challenge with hydrogen compared to these other forms of fuel. So while at a kind of at a theoretical level, the hydrogen stores about 3 times the amount of energy per weight than say diesel, but it's the smallest element, single atom. In order to get enough of it into a given space, you have to compress it, to very high pressures. So getting enough hydrogen, in order to provide a meaningful amount of energy means you have to compress it. And that kind of adds to the cost of the storage cylinders as well. So there are some downsides. So you can't cost effectively move large amounts of compressed hydrogen around in the way that you can with natural gas, and particularly liquids, petroleum products. So for bulk moving of hydrogen, you would be looking at pipelines. And in Scotland, there's a lot of work being done looking at repurposing the existing natural gas pipeline network. Initially blending hydrogen into the natural gas network. And then eventually, because you can blend up to 25% hydrogen into the gas network and still use the same central heating systems and cookers and things in people's houses. So quite a bit of work being done in the UK to look at blending hydrogen into the gas network and using that existing pipework infrastructure to move it around, which makes a lot of sense. if you're wanting to bulk transport in the way that you would move oil around, then you really need to convert hydrogen into something else. And at the moment, the kind of, and this is what's been called power to X at the moment. So looking at converting hydrogen into ammonia, because there's already a process there and a lot of infrastructure for moving ammonia around the world because it's a traded commodity. So and it's liquid, so you could convert hydrogen into ammonia at a very large scale, put it into large tankers, and then shift the ammonia, around. Methanol is another one that people are looking at, where you, particularly if you can capture CO2 from an existing process that's producing CO2, combine it with hydrogen into methanol. It's a liquid fuel, easy to bulk transport. So these are the kind of ways people are exploring, about how could you move and store hydrogen. There are somewhat been looking at using salt caverns, so big underground caverns that have been excavated over the years are all mine workings where you could use them to store hydrogen gas at less high pressures, because obviously the more you compress it, the more energy you need to do that. So and so looking at if you could store it in that kind of facility and then pipeline it from there to where it could be used. So it depends on what you're using it for, but for transport it's likely to always be in a compressed gas form. I think people are looking at hydrogen for trucks because you can store a lot more energy and in less weight in hydrogen form than you can in batteries. So I think it's likely that we'll see hydrogen fuel cell trucks. In fact, there are already some hydrogen fuel cell trucks starting to come onto the market because you don't lose anywhere near as much of the payload in battery weightage with hydrogen as but that would be in compressed form. So it's very much horses for courses, depending on what you're wanting to use it for. So.
Yeah, no, it's the transportation piece of hydrogen was. I mean, all I knew is it was sort of tough to store and tough to transport, but with the explanation, that totally makes sense now. And so, I mean, are there certain parts of the country or maybe the world that they are really putting a lot of resources and capital to work for hydrogen infrastructure? Because I would imagine that kind of once you get going, you have to commit. Like, it's not just build maybe one pipeline here, one pipeline there. It's like, if you want to put this stuff at scale, you need a full sort of, again, like if you wanted to say power a city, just hypothetically speaking, you'd have to be having pipelines run in and out of that city like a spider web to be able to tie into these lines, kind of like how natural gas is for the most part. Is that happening anywhere? Do you know?
So certainly in the UK, there's been quite a bit of government funding in because the UK has natural gas from the North Sea. We've got natural gas pipelines going into certainly most houses in most cities in the UK, because that's the way we've been heating our homes for the last 30-40 years. So where you've already got that natural gas infrastructure, it makes sense to look at initially it's about blending hydrogen in. So because there's not enough hydrogen being produced at the moment to replace the natural gas that's required, that's being produced. So initially it's about blending hydrogen in. As your production increases, you can get up to 25% blend without people having to change their gas boilers and things. So that's being looked at in the UK because we've already invested billions in putting that pipeline infrastructure in place. If you were looking at starting from scratch, it just probably wouldn't make sense to be looking at burning hydrogen, using hydrogen for heating and stuff like that. You'd be better looking at things like heat pumps and that kind of thing. But where you've got the infrastructure, it makes sense. And the UK is one of those places. There's a lot of investment going in Europe in the hydrogen side because they are desperately trying to find an alternative to Russian natural gas. Particularly since the last couple of years, Germany is probably investing the most because they were the most exposed to Russian gas. So they are, in fact, our government here in Scotland has delegations from Germany over regularly saying, when is Scotland going to get to a point where it could be exporting hydrogen by pipeline or hydrogen derivatives like ammonia or methanol to Germany, because we have a market here for it.
Wow. So does hydrogen get traded on an open market like natural gas? Like, are there prices for it, or is it traded?
There will be for that 70 million tons that's currently produced, Justin. It's not anywhere near as large as the market for oil and gas products, but I presume there's a market for hydrogen at the moment. There certainly is for ammonia, which a lot of the hydrogen that's produced is used then to produce ammonia. So there's a market for kind of for ammonia. So yeah, there'll be
fascinating.
You'll have, I'm sure there'll be listeners out there that will say, yep, we know where you can trade hydrogen. But right now there's not a lot of green hydrogen being produced. There's a lot of talk about doing it. Australia is making a lot of noises about green hydrogen production because it has such huge solar potential, and solar energy has just got so cheap over the last sort of kind of decade, that you can look at where you've got very good solar performance and access to water. That's the thing you also have to have for green hydrogen production. You need to have water. But
does it matter what type of water? Like, can it be saline water? Or does it have to be fresh water?
So the current electrolyzer technologies require deionized water, so it has to be quite purified water. So if your only source of water is seawater, then it has to be desalinated in order to, which adds to the kind of cost of the inputs. There are some interesting technologies being developed which are still at early prototype stage, but which are kind of much more water agnostic. So if they manage to get scaled up and work effectively, then that would mean any kind of water that you have access to, seawater, wastewater, river water, could be used without the need for expensive treatment. But current electrolyzer technology requires deionized water to operate effectively. So.
Got it. So let's kind of talk a bit before the end of the hour here in terms of Plus Zero and what you guys are doing specifically. We mentioned it a little bit at the beginning. You've got the units that were used to supply power to these events. Is that the sort of your bread and butter in terms of what you offer? Is that product? And if so, how does that typically work in terms of, let's just say I'm a company looking to replace a diesel generator. We call you and you provide us with a quote, and then you ship it out there and set it up and monitor it and service it until the event's done, or how does that typically work? And then, let's start there.
Yeah. So at the moment, while hydrogen's used in bulk, in industrial processes and stuff, the actual use of hydrogen to do the kind of stuff that we do is still very early stage. So when I decided, as I mentioned earlier, I could see there's a huge opportunity for these island communities around hydrogen production, use of the hydrogen locally, and also as a commodity. But in order to get things going, so I decided, okay, how do I get things moving in a sector where nobody's using hydrogen for very much at the moment? So so we set Plus Zero up to both produce green hydrogen, because when we launch, you can't buy green hydrogen in the market in the UK at the moment. Nobody's producing it for sale. There's one or two small scale facilities just coming on stream, but 2 years ago when we started, nobody was producing it. So we had to actually set up a small electrolyzer facility, which we set up in the Western Isles, connected to a wind turbine, and started producing green hydrogen. And then we used that as the fuel for our generators. So at the moment, we can offer that complete solution to a customer that is wanting to replace their diesel generators with a carbon-free solution. So we provide the fuel, We provide the generator, we take them both to their site, we connect it all up, and we operate it for them. A complete kind of turnkey solution, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to do it, because nobody is kind of, it's not like a diesel generator. You can phone somebody up and get the cheapest price from a number of companies, and then you can get the cheapest diesel price from somebody else, and you can do it yourself currently with a hydrogen solution. You can't do that. So we provide all of that. And at the moment it's more expensive. It's just because hydrogen is produced in such small volumes. It's more expensive than diesel. So the customers that we work with at the moment, are pretty committed to showing the future and how you could decarbonize their activities. So
that's great.
Events or film and TV production, some of the big, the Amazon and Netflix, the big streaming companies are starting to look quite hard at the power they use for their outdoor filming, stuff like that, and are willing to pay a bit more to get that carbon-free solution. So
interesting. And so are you guys sort of geographically limited, or do you guys operate all over the world, or what kind of scale are you guys at now?
Yeah, we'd love to operate all over the world, and we will be.
Yeah, that's the goal, right?
But right now we just operate in the UK. There's no reason why we couldn't. Our equipment, can travel. If we could source hydrogen in another country, for instance, then there's no reason why we couldn't deliver our solution, because it doesn't make sense for us to ship hydrogen from here, say, to France, because the cost associated with that would just be crazy, and the carbon involved in moving the hydrogen there would more than outweigh probably the carbon you would save from doing the deployment. So you have to be sensible. So at the moment, we just do stuff in the UK. But as we kind of grow, and as hydrogen starts to be produced in more places at higher volume, we would certainly look to expand into those other countries. Say Germany focused a lot. They've got a number of green hydrogen production facilities up and running now, refueling stations. So that could be an opportunity for us, at some point in the next few years, is to look at expanding into a country like that. So
interesting. Well, who knows? Maybe one of the listeners will be your first US client. You never know.
Well, we're just working on a new version of our generator, because you operate in a slightly different power frequency in the States. So so we're the next version of our generator would be able to operate in the US and Canada and stuff. So we would be delighted to talk to any of your listeners.
Yeah, of course. Hey, you never know. It just starts with a single conversation, right?
Yeah.
So just, but again, I think it's just, at the very least, is just getting a good understanding of what kind of technologies are out there. I interviewed a company quite a while back called Kaizen Energy, and it was very similar. They were using, I think, ammonia to help power, or to help basically replace diesel generators through I think ammonia, but it still had something to do with hydrogen. And again, it's been so long, and I don't play in that world, so I forget the technical part of it, but it was.
But I think what they were doing is say you can convert hydrogen to ammonia, and then you can convert ammonia back to hydrogen and nitrogen. So their technology was probably cracking ammonia on site to produce the hydrogen, which would then potentially be used in a generator, a fuel cell, or in our case, combustion engine generator.
Yeah,
the
that sounds.
Around ammonia is it's a poisonous chemical. So while it works well in some industrial applications, we think for the kind of things that we're doing at the moment, outdoor events with lots of members of the public or film production stuff, the risk of spilling ammonia or releasing ammonia would be a bit more than we would like to take. So
No, that's again totally understandable, right? You have to understand the risks associated with whatever technology you're deploying, and especially when you're producing power, there's a lot of things happening there.
I mean, there's quite a lot of exciting developments coming on. I mean, I was listening to was it Mark Rossano you had on the last podcast, who was talking a bit about some of the things they're doing, and technologies that kind of take bio waste and convert it to energy and hydrogen and graphene and stuff. That we're doing some work with a company over here that is about to test a technology that again takes natural gas and then splits the hydrogen off and creates graphene through a process called microwave plasma.
Oh, wow.
And because the graphene itself is quite a valuable product, that's a way of producing very, very cost-effective hydrogen, but permanently capturing the carbon from the natural gas and make in graphene form, which as Mark flagged up, she's got all sorts of great uses in across a whole range of things. So where you've got waste methane or whatever, you could see how you could convert that into hydrogen, which could be used as a fuel, and graphene, which is a valuable product as its own right. So there's a lot of things coming up that I think will just start to mix and match the different energy sources we've got, and as much as possible stop the carbon getting released into the atmosphere, but convert it into useful kind of products. So it's exciting kind of. It's an exciting sector to be involved in, but it's still very early stage.
No, it is, and that's again, it's very interesting to have folks like yourself on to be able to expose that, because it's, again, for the most part here in the US, there's not as much effort being put into other energy supply technologies. I mean, although there's most of what we're focused on, especially on the oil and gas side, or a lot of the oil and gas majors are focused on the carbon capture, sequestration, stuff like that. There's a few folks who are playing in the hydrogen game, but it's kind of few and far between. But nonetheless, again, that's the beauty of technologies. We can sit here on Zoom and I can deliver the message to my folks here to hopefully learn and to appreciate what's going on a global level. Because like I said, it's, with the demand of energy only going to increase over time, we need to savor what we have and leverage, again, some of the offset molecules and gases that we can use. So again, I just, hopefully people have an open mind to be able to, maybe click through and dive in deeper. Is there any good resources for folks? Like I always found the hydrogen space interesting. So someone like myself who doesn't necessarily work in this space, but wants to kind of keep their finger on the pulse of what's going on, are there any good resources or newsletters or websites that someone can who's not very familiar with the space, just learn and kind of pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of authoritative sources like the International Energy Agency, which has published quite a lot of reports on hydrogen, the opportunity, the pros and cons and stuff like that. So, you can go to sources like that. The European Union have got, they have something called the Clean Hydrogen Partnership, which is a route through which they're investing a lot of money in trying to develop the kind of hydrogen economy. So if listeners Googled the sort of Clean Hydrogen Partnership in the European Union, that would take them to their website. Quite a lot of information there.
Excellent.
So yeah, there's a reasonable amount out there. There's something called the Hydrogen Council, which is a kind of international body. A lot of the energy companies are on that as well. They publish quite a lot of material. So
perfect.
So yeah, a lot of sources.
If you don't mind, at some point, if you could email or send me some links, that way I can put them in the show notes and make it easy for everybody. They can just scroll down, click. And again, I think the biggest thing that we can do in energy is educate each other. And so, I think that's at the very least something I can do for the listeners. Again, obviously listening, they've, I'm sure, learned a ton. I know I did. Before we close out, I want to wrap it up with just more of a sort of a fun kind of question. You may have heard it on the other podcast that you've listened to of mine, but I mean, again, I'm curious because you're over there in Scotland. What does an ideal Friday night look like for you? Let's just say you had all the pounds in the world, which, or money in the world. You could spend it with whoever you wanted. You could go wherever, to just disconnect from everything you're doing. What would the ideal Friday night look like for David?
So at this time of the year, the kind of probably an ideal Friday night is to head out with my wife Maura into the Edinburgh Festival, because I say there are thousands of shows going on, and at least hundreds and hundreds of shows, comedians, dance, music, plays, a lot of stuff actually out on the street, street performers that are, doing stuff that you can just watch for free. So, and thousands of people from all around the world. So it's just a real buzz in Edinburgh at the moment. So yeah, so I'll be having dinner with Morag shortly after this, and then I think we'll head out into Edinburgh and just enjoy the buzz. Other than that, normally we've got a good friends network here, so we will often, one of the friends will host, we'll go around folks for dinner, catch up with what everybody's doing. We've got quite a diverse bunch of friends in terms of what they do, so there's always quite a lot of interesting stuff going on.
Man.
So.
You've sold it on me. I'd at some point love to check out Scotland and that area of the world, man. It's we went to London, Paris, and Rome, which is our only experience traveling outside North America. But it sounds amazing, especially with the beaches and stuff and the big party and the shows you're talking about. That's right up my alley. So if you had to pick one show, because you mentioned dance and comedy and perhaps music, like what would be the one if you could pick one? What's your favorite show to watch?
So I was late coming to it, but I really enjoy dance now. My wife for years and years and years said, "Yeah, come on, Dave, let's go to the ballet or contemporary dance and stuff." And I used to say, "No, I'm not interested." But eventually, she persuaded me to go along and to see a dance show. It was Michael Clark, who's a sort of. When he was younger, he was an enfant terrible of the ballet scene, but he now has his own company, and they had put on a contemporary show. And I find the physicality of the dancers and just what they can do with their bodies and the poise and the grace and stuff just mesmerizing. Also, if it's similar with acrobatics, you can quite a lot of circus and acrobatic shows in the festival too. It's just watching people do incredible things with their bodies, and it's just I really enjoy that. So yeah, ideal show would be going to a kind of high quality kind of dance show, I think, tonight.
Beautiful. It's for the listeners out there, there's more to a bunch of twerking going on TikTok. Clearly there's other forms of dance out there in the rest of the world that is just as good, if not better. So maybe do some Googling on that one. But no, that's neat, man. I can appreciate that. Tells a little bit more about you and what you enjoy doing. So I appreciate the humility there and sharing that. So if people want to reach out or get to know more about Plus Zero, what you're doing, or want to connect with you, just maybe again for opportunity or just to ask questions, what's the best way to reach out? And you don't have to spell it out, but I can put the links. But I'm assuming LinkedIn. Are there any forms of social media out there that you're on, or?
LinkedIn would probably, or just kind of email me directly, Justin. I'll send you some links for information, but you've got my email address as well.
Yes, I'll put that in the show notes.
LinkedIn or email is probably the simplest way. And I think we're very much up for collaboration, and it's actually a big thing in the kind of emerging clean tech kind of energy sector in Scotland. Certainly, companies supporting each other. We hope to be working with Bina's company kind of going forward as well. Everybody kind of looks out and tries to kind of create opportunities. So if there's any kind of any of your listeners who've got companies that think, actually, there's maybe something that we could support or David could support us, then we're very, very happy to look at ways in which we can work collaboratively with other people and companies. So.
No, I love that. My slogan is "We is greater than me," and then that comes in all different forms, and it's a collaboration amongst companies. I think is what's going to help accelerate the transition, or again, however you define this, but just the ever evolving landscape of energy is collaborating with companies from all over the world. And so I'm glad you brought that up. And so if anyone out there, again, feels like there's opportunity or just would like to bounce ideas off of David, again, I really encourage you to reach out. David, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And for the listeners, really appreciate the support. Continue listening. Again, I do this to help educate and entertain and hopefully add value to the ecosystem. And so for the listeners, always remember that everyone deserves access to energy, and we is greater than me. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Justin. Been a pleasure.